Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
Sir, our witness today is Mr. Christopher Day.
Yes.
Please, could the witness be sworn?
Please repeat after me. I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
shall be
the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
Good morning, Mr. Day. As you know, my name is Miss Hodge, and I will be asking questions on behalf of the inquiry. Please, could you give your full name?
Christopher Mark Day.
You should have in front of you a hard copy of a witness statement dated the 19th of April 2024. Do you have that before?
I do.
That statement should run to 49 pages, including an index of exhibits. Is that correct?
It is.
Could I ask you please to turn to page 41 of your statement? At the top, there's a statement of truth, and underneath a signature. Is that your signature?
It is.
Is the content of the statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is.
Thank you. Mr. Day, your statement is now in evidence before the inquiry. I'm going to ask you some questions about matters arising in your statement, but I don't propose to take you through each and every topic that you address there. Could I ask you please to begin by briefly summarising your professional background before you joined Post Office Limited?
Yes. My finance background started with working at Beecham PLC as a graduate trainee in the Group Treasury Department. I then moved into financial markets with a US investment bank before joining Diageo, where I had a succession of roles in corporate finance and capital markets, and then as an international finance director in the Netherlands and Germany. On returning to the UK, I joined the BBC as Group Financial Controller, and then I joined Post Office as Chief Financial Officer in August 2011.
Thank you. You explain in your statement that you were appointed by and reported into the Chief Executive Officer, Ms. Venables. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you've explained that you were recruited to bring a more commercial focus to the business's financial division. Is that right?
I believe that's the case, yes.
Is that something which you recall Ms. Venables raising with you at the time of your appointment?
I do. I recall her referring to what she called the primacy of finance, which was that she wanted finance to take a more proactive role in the management of the Post Office. And the context for that was that we were keen to move to a situation where the Post Office broke even and was no longer dependent on public subsidy.
How would you describe the financial performance of Post Office Limited when you took on the role of CFO?
Well, I think it was a large and complex organisation. It was still loss-making at that point. We had various elements of the business that we were working on to increase profitability. One notable one would be the Crown Estate, where we had a very clear plan to drive it back to profitability. Other elements of the estate were sort of large cost centres effectively, so very limited in terms of the number of sub-post offices that we could close, for example.
In your statement, you described the focus of your role comprising three principal elements. You've identified the first being to drive the financial performance of the business, as you've referred. The second being to provide commercial support to the business. And thirdly, to help the Post Office to compete on the provision of government services with the aim of creating a business which was no longer dependent upon public subsidy. Those are the three aspects you've identified there, is that right?
Correct.
In a nutshell, was your task to support the CEO in her efforts to make the Post Office a more successful business?
Yes.
Could you please describe your working relationship with Ms Reynolds?
We had a close collaborative working relationship. I believe we worked well together. As I say, she was keen to promote the financial discipline of the organisation, and that suited me, my purposes, very well. It was good to work for a chief executive who had that focus on the numbers and the financial performance.
You've mentioned it was her desire for finance to take a more proactive role in management. It's right, isn't it, that you deputise for Ms Reynolds on occasion when she was on annual leave?
Yes, from time to time I would deputise for her.
And therefore your role, certainly then, and I think you accept, extended more broadly than simply dealing with financial matters.
Yes.
I'd like to ask you some brief questions about your responsibilities as CFO. Would it be fair to say that there were two principal aspects to that, one of which related to the external financial reporting of the business?
Yes, that was my primary focus.
You've explained that it was your duty as CFO to ensure that all of the company's annual financial statements were true, fair and accurate. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that the independent annual financial audit was conducted properly.
Correct.
During your tenure as CFO, the firm which performed that independent audit of Pol was Ernst & Young, is that right?
It was.
The other aspect of your role, so the other principal aspect, related to the day-to-day management of the business's financial accounting, budgeting and planning, is that right?
Correct.
Now, one area of the business for which you were responsible was the product and branch accounting division, is that right?
Yes.
You've explained in your statement that product and branch accounting performed the back office accounting function of the business, is that right?
Yes. Essentially, it reconciled the client accounts with the customer accounts.
And it provided you with the aggregated data and information which you needed to produce the Post Office's annual financial reports.
Yes.
Would it be fair to say that product and branch accounting therefore served an essential role in helping you to meet your obligations for financial reporting?
Yes.
During your tenure, the division was led by Rod Ismay, is that right?
Correct.
In your statement, you say you would have been briefed about the Horizon system by Mr. Ismay, or possibly by a member of his team, on your arrival, is that right?
Yes. I don't recall precise conversations, but I'm sure they would have taken place early in my tenure.
I think it's at paragraph 38 of your statement, please. WITN 100000100. It's on page 12, please, paragraph 38. And so the penultimate sentence reads, as CFO, I was expected to have a general understanding of how Post Office Limited accounts for transactions in branches and by product type, for the purpose ultimately of ensuring the reliability of Pol's financial statements. Presumably, at a minimum, you would have understood that Horizon was a point of sale and financial accounting system that was operated and maintained by Fujitsu Service Limited.
Yes, I would.
And you would have been aware that the system was used in the post office branches to process and record each transaction performed at the counter by a sub-postmaster, a manager, an assistant, for example.
Yes, I would.
You would have also been aware, I assume, again at a minimum, that those transactions processed and recorded by Horizon were transmitted to Post Office's back office accounting systems.
Yes.
And there, as you've said, they would be reconciled, checked and reconciled against data provided to the Post Office by its clients.
Correct.
Do you recall what you were told, if anything, by Mr. Ismay about the contractual relationship between the Post Office and its agents?
I don't, I'm afraid.
Were you aware at the time that you took on your role that Post Office and branch accounting were responsible for issuing transaction corrections to recover from sub-postmasters accounting shortfalls shown by Horizon?
I believe I would have been aware shortly after joining, either through conversations with Mr. Ismay during my induction or having read the now called Ismay report.
I will come on to that in a moment, but before I do, do you recall what you were told about that process of issuing transaction corrections?
I don't.
It was shortly after you took up your role as CFO that you received an email, an attachment from Mr. Ismay relating to challenges to the integrity of Horizon. Is that right?
Correct.
Could we please first turn up that email, which is at poll 00294836. Thank you. So we see there, it's an email from Mr. Ismay to you, Mr. Day, on the 8th of September 2011. So relatively shortly after you took up, I think you said August 2011 was when you started in the role of CFO. The subject of the email is Horizon Challenges, a report dated 2nd of August 2010. And the name of the attachment is Horizon Integrity. Mr. Ismay says, Chris, further to my last email, please find attached a report I did last summer for Dave Smith, then MD. It's a long report, but that detail was agreed as necessary, and I would be grateful if you could read it as context to the update I need to give you. So just pausing there, would it be fair to say that this wasn't simply a report that passed across your desk? It was something that Mr. Ismay wanted you to read and discuss with you?
Yes.
He goes on to say then in the third paragraph, Mike Granville has had related stakeholder conversations. Do you recall Mr. Granville's role?
I don't recall his precise role. I think he was involved in government communications, PR type role.
It goes on to say, and I expect you may have heard references to this area, by which he presumably meant Horizon Integrity. Would you agree?
Yes.
From Kevin, Paula, Susan, or Mike. So he's assuming there, is he not, that this is a subject that you would have already discussed with directors of the company, the chief executive, general counsel, or Mr. Granville?
That's what he's saying, yes.
Do you recall whether you did, in fact, discuss the issue of Horizon Integrity with any of those individuals named there?
I have no recollection of discussing it with any of those individuals.
Were you concerned to be told, early in your tenure, that the integrity of the system from which you derived your financial accounting data and information was being challenged?
My recollection is that the report was shown to me partly for Mr. Ismay to describe the role that he was doing and the function of his team, but also clearly to alert me to the fact that there had been challenges to the integrity of the system. But as I understood it, those had all been addressed at the time.
So is the answer you weren't concerned at all?
I was aware of the challenges. I don't think I was unduly concerned.
You would have known, would you not, that if the Horizon system lacked financial integrity, then the financial statements for which you were responsible might not be true, fair, and
Absolutely.
In your previous roles, had you ever come across a situation like this before, where users of the business's accounting system were saying, we believe it lacks financial integrity?
No, I hadn't.
It's your evidence that I believe you had no independent recollection, so you have no independent recollection of reading this report. Is that correct?
That's true. I'm sure I read it, but I don't recall reading it.
And you don't recall whether you had any discussions with Mr. Ismay, albeit this email does tend to suggest that he wished to discuss the matter with you.
I think it's highly likely that I discussed it with him as part of my induction. I don't recall the precise conversation.
I'd like to explore with you what you thought or would have thought, based on your recollection at the time, about some of the issues that are raised in this report. Please could we bring up a copy of the report at POL 00294837. So we see at the top there, as we know, this was a report that Mr. Ismay produced for the then Managing Director, Dave Smith. And there are various senior managers in the organisation who were copied into this report when originally produced, or just over a year prior. The title of the report is Response to Challenges Regarding Horizon Integrity. And the first paragraph reads, Post Office Limited has, over the years, had to dismiss and prosecute a number of sub-postmasters and Crown staff following financial losses in branches. A small number of these have made counterclaims that they are not guilty of the charges made, but that the Horizon system was faulty. Just pausing there, had you had any prior experience of working for an organisation which prosecuted its staff for financial losses suffered by the business?
I hadn't, no.
You've explained in your statement that you did not know when you first joined the Post Office that it brought private prosecutions against its agents and its staff. Is that right?
Yes, I don't recall being aware at the time, although I can see it's indirectly referenced in this report.
And so by the time you read this report in early September, you would have been aware of that fact, would you not?
I think it's highly likely that I was aware.
Knowing that the Post Office brought prosecutions in these circumstances, would that have affected the importance that you attached to the financial integrity of the business's accounting systems?
Yes, I think it would.
Why?
But I think my primary focus would have been on whether I, as CFO, could rely on the integrity of the system to verify the accuracy of the financial statements of Post Office. That would be my primary focus.
In terms of wider risk to the business, however, would you have been concerned about the importance of financial integrity, bearing in mind that you knew that the business brought prosecutions in reliance on Horizon data against its agents and employees?
Don't know whether I made that specific connection at the time.
The report goes on to say in the second paragraph, various lobbying groups have been set up by former sub-postmasters, and these have at times received national media coverage, and in some cases been taken up by local MPs. Most recently, Channel 4 has proposed a news article about this area. This suggests, does it not, that concerns about Horizon's integrity were not isolated to a few disgruntled sub-postmasters who'd been convicted, but it attracted the attention and support of members of Parliament and the national media.
Yes, it does.
Do you think that would have registered with you at the time as a significant area of risk for the business?
I think the context for this would have been a knowledge of the size of the network and the relatively scarce incidents of such matters, But I think in terms of peripheral vision, yes, I'm sure I would have had an awareness that there had been some media coverage and that there was some reputational risk to the Post Office.
If we continue, please, onto the following paragraph, the report defines its purpose there as being to provide an objective internal review of Post Office Limited's processes and controls around branch accounting. And it explains it includes an overview of Post Office's control environment, its response to accounting errors, which we've referred to as transaction corrections, its IT systems, so Horizon versus Horizon Online. Were you aware at this stage as to the existence of different iterations of the system? That is to say, an earlier version which had been superseded by Horizon Online.
I believe I would have known that Horizon Online had replaced Horizon in January 2010. That's probably the extent of my knowledge at that stage.
It refers there to the resolution of known issues under IT systems. And thirdly, third-party perspectives comprising court judgments, media, and audit. And then lastly, statistics on branch accounting issues, suspensions, and prosecutions. Would you agree that that accurately summarises the focus of the report being on the Post Office's controls, processes and controls, as opposed to, by contrast, Fujitsu's processes and controls?
Yes, I would.
What you were not receiving in this report was a very detailed explanation of how Horizon operated at a technical level. Is that fair?
That's fair.
And therefore, to someone without a detailed technical background, it was nonetheless a relatively comprehensible report, was it?
Sorry?
For someone who did not have a detailed technical background in IT matters, what was canvassed in this report was readily understandable to you, was it?
Broadly, yes, it was.
If we can move on, please, to the executive summary, which is on the second half of this page. It reads in the first paragraph, the allegations to which we are responding follow on from cases where thousands of pounds were missing at audit. We remain satisfied that this money was missing due to theft in the branch. We do not believe the account balances against which the audits were conducted were corrupt. Just pausing there, were you told by Mr. Ismay, or did you later become aware during your time as CFO, what, if any, inquiries were made by product and branch accounting when an SPM or an employee said, I simply do not know what has caused the accounting shortfall in the branch accounts. I think the system must be at fault. So my question is, would you have known what processes were followed by product and branch accounting to investigate the causes of these shortfalls?
I think I would have had a broad understanding of the processes in terms of investigating differences, but don't think I would have had a detailed understanding of what happened in each particular case.
Do you think that's something you would have inquired about at the time? Namely, what are we doing as a business to satisfy ourselves that these losses are genuine, bearing in mind what we're being told by our agents and employees about suspected faults in the system?
I don't recall, but my memory is that these were relatively rare occurrences. So
we'll come on in shortly to look at that issue. We turn to the second paragraph, please, of the executive summary. It states, Post Office Limited has extensive controls spanning systems, processes, training and support. Horizon is robust, but like any system, depends on the quality of entries by the users. If we just pause there again, Would that have struck you at the time that you read this report as an accurate statement, namely that the robustness of Horizon depended on the quality of the entries made by its users?
I believe it would have done, yes.
Would it have occurred to you that the quality of the code and the work undertaken to develop and maintain the system might have been significant factors which affected the robustness of the system?
I don't believe I would have had that awareness.
Do you think it would have struck you at the time that statements like that betrayed an assumption by the Post Office that any fault, any accounting error, responsibility for any accounting error must lie with the user?
I don't think I would have seen it that way, but I can see now that it could be interpreted that way.
From your experience of working with large-scale IT systems, would you have considered that to be an accurate assumption, that any accounting error must be the fault of the user?
No, I don't think I would have had that general view.
What would your experience have been?
I think my experience would have been that faults could have arisen for any number of reasons, either user error, problems with software, problems with processing.
Do you recall whether you took any steps to challenge the assumption that we see there?
I don't recall, but I don't believe I did. I think I read and accepted this report at first sight.
If we carry on, please, to the final paragraph on the first page, which reads, "The integrity of Horizon is founded on its tamper-proof logs, its real-time backups, and the absence of backdoors, so that all data entry or acceptance is at branch level and is tagged against the logon ID of the user. This means that ownership of the accounting is truly at branch level." What, on the face of it, what Mr. Ismay appears to be identifying here are a variety of security features which underpin his stated confidence in the integrity of Horizon. Is that fair?
Yes.
What did you understand Mr. Ismay to mean by the absence of backdoors?
I would have understood this to mean that only the sub-postmaster had access directly to their data, that there was no intervention at the centre by product and branch accounting, that the data stood in accordance with what was input in the branch, and that there was no other access to that data, hence the tamper-proof logs.
We know, because we've discussed it, you were aware that product and branch accounting issued transaction corrections, and Mr. Ismay deals with these, please, at page 7 of the report. So this is under the heading Accounting and Control in Product and Branch Accounting. And within the box at the top, the first paragraph reads, "Central controls over accounting are primarily in the product and branch accounting team, but also include activity in cash centres and alerts from our method of payment processes." If we go on, please, to the following page at page 8. There's a number of bullet points there. The first one relating to transaction corrections. This is where we see here he gives his explanation about backdoors. It reads, "Double entry adjustments sent to branches for their acceptance." This is his definition of transaction corrections. "There is no backdoor to force them into branch accounts. Visibility is key to ensure ownership of the issue and prevent any risk of arguments about backdoors." So that would be consistent, would it not, with your understanding? You've stated
Yes.
to me just now, essentially. You had been told here that if and insofar as product and branch accounting issued a transaction correction, it still had to be accepted by the agent in branch,
Correct.
and therefore they retained ultimate control over their accounting data.
Correct.
Please could we return to the executive summary, which is on page 2 now. In the second paragraph reads, forgive me, I'm just waiting for it to show. So please, at the top of page 2. Thank you. The second paragraph begins, accounting errors do happen through user mistakes, but these can be explained and resolved case by case. So again, we see that assumption that all accounting discrepancies are caused by the user, do we not?
We do.
System issues have also arisen, but again, Pol has been able to explain them and rectify them. So you've been given assurance there that if and insofar as issues have arisen, they have been rectified by the business.
Correct.
Whilst they've affected the availability and functionality of the system, with consequent impacts on customers and clients, they do not bring the integrity of this system into question. Now, this paragraph of the report alerted you to system issues, did it not?
Yes.
That were known to Post Office Limited at the time. Could we please move forward to the section of the report where these system issues are addressed in more detail? That's at page 15. So this section is entitled Known IT Issues and Their Applicability to the Allegations Made. I'd like to ask you, please, some questions about the example given at subparagraph B, which is described as barcode sticking. The first paragraph reads, a small number of branches have experienced a situation where a customer transaction, for example, a bill payment, sticks on the details of the preceding transaction. In some cases, the branch has spotted it immediately, but in some cases, it has only come to light when the customer complains that they are being chased for an unpaid bill. Incidents go back to 2005. So, on the face of it, if we pause there, what's being described here is an accounting error, namely that a transaction has not been properly processed and recorded by Horizon. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
What's more, contrary to the assertion that's made in the executive summary, it was not an error caused by the user, but by the system itself. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
This paragraph also tells us that the issue dated back to 2005. So this is 5 years before this report was prepared.
Correct.
If we read on, we can see Mr. Ismay's description of the steps which were taken by Post Office Limited to explain and rectify the problem, as he suggests in his executive summary. The second paragraph reads, up to now, it had been understood that this issue related to a version of scanners where Post Office Limited did not know which other branches had the same version. It was not therefore possible to isolate other branches. It was also a rare event on the scanners themselves. It was not a systematic failure with every transaction on the particular scanner. If we pause there again, we can see from this paragraph, can we not, that Post Office Limited had originally understood this problem to relate to a piece of hardware, namely the barcode scanner that was used and that supported the Horizon system.
Yes.
It's also clear that this misunderstanding as to the source of the problem had prevailed until shortly before this report was written in August 2010. Is that not clear from the statement? Up to now, it has been understood.
Yes, you could interpret it that way.
Namely, between 2005 and we're now nearly August 2010 when this report is produced, it has been assumed by Post Office Limited that this problem related to a piece of hardware. Oh, I think you agree that that's
Yes, I can interpret it that way, yes.
an acceptable interpretation of that. In terms of the remedial steps that Post Office said they've taken to deal with this issue, you were told here that Post Office didn't know which branches were affected by what was thought to be this faulty version of the barcode scanner. And as a result, they'd not been able to identify the branches affected by the problem. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
So is it not right, you're essentially being told here that for a period of nearly 5 years, Post Office had done nothing to address the underlying problem which was causing this known issue?
I don't know if I'm being told that. I think he's seeking to differentiate between any errors which would have been caused by inputting of data in a branch with broader hardware issues which he's asserting did not have any direct bearing on any of the previous legal cases, and that there would be from time to time glitches that would happen with the system that would be rectified. I accept that it looks as if this particular one took a long time to be rectified.
So if we look then at the following paragraph, it confirms that Fujitsu had investigated the issue, that is to say the suspected problem with the hardware, the barcode scanner, and had advised Post Office it's not a hardware-related issue, it's a Riposte software issue. Were you aware of the function that Riposte served in the Horizon system?
No.
It goes on to state it will cease to be a problem with Horizon Online as HOL, meaning Horizon Online, does not use Riposte. So again, we see here, quite some time after the issue first arose, Fujitsu have ultimately diagnosed it as a software fault, not a hardware issue. But they're not intending to do anything about it because the original legacy version of Horizon is going to shortly be superseded. Is that how you would have read?
That appears to be the case, yes.
Now, what Mr. Ismay goes on to tell you is that the issue does not appear to have arisen in any of the legal cases in question, and the incidents have been resolved at all branches where it has been noted. Now, pausing there, what you were being told is that where accounting errors had arisen and had been discovered, they had been resolved. That's
yes.
Correct, isn't it? But you'd also been told in the preceding paragraphs that Post Office Limited had not taken steps to identify the branches affected by this problem in the period between 2005 and 2010. Had they? They'd not taken active steps to try and identify which branches were affected because they didn't know which branches had this faulty barcode scanner.
That would appear to be the case, yes.
And the Post Office had instead relied upon the branch to spot the problem or a customer to raise a complaint, for example, about an unpaid bill?
Yes,
So a reactive rather than a proactive
it looks that way.
response. Bearing in mind that this fault appears to have persisted for a period of 5 years, undiagnosed and unresolved in the Horizon system, would you have not entertained the possibility that there would be affected branches where accounting errors hadn't been detected and adequately resolved? Where, for example, a sub-postmaster had made it good because they couldn't work out the underlying cause of the problem,
I think that's a possibility.
or had been made to repay?
But again, I think Mr. Ismay is seeking to draw a differentiation between errors or imbalances generated at the point of sale from issues relating to hardware or software that is no longer used. But I can see from this that this may have been a relatively widespread issue.
But it appeared to show, did it not, that there was a software bug in the system which was capable of causing accounting errors. Because if a customer complained that their bill hadn't been paid, then at some stage in the process an error had arisen, had it not?
Yes, it would depend how, the order of magnitude, how many customers and branches were affected.
Do you consider that, or did you consider that this information was consistent with the confidence being expressed by Mr. Ismay in the integrity of the Horizon system?
I viewed this series of bugs or glitches that had happened historically as being things which typically happen in a large IT computer system, that they had been addressed. I can see this one took a long time to be addressed. But what I was clearly being asked to accept was that none of these issues had any direct relation to previous legal cases.
That appears to be the assumption that was made by Mr. Ismay, and that's what he says in the report. But what I'm testing with you is whether that's really consistent with what you were being told here, because you were being told that Post Office were taking no steps to detect this issue, to proactively resolve it, and Fujitsu weren't even aware that the software fault existed. So how could you or Mr. Ismay possibly be confident that these were isolated cases and they'd all been resolved?
Well, I think my personal assurance would have been, again, going back to my duties as CFO, was to verify the accuracy of the company's financial statements. And rightly or wrongly, I would have taken assurance from the fact that Horizon Online had been introduced in 2010 and that this particular issue no longer existed.
It didn't say very much, though, did it, for Post Office's processes and procedures before you came into post?
Well, it suggested that there had been issues in the past which had generally been resolved, and or Horizon Online had superseded the previous system.
The final thing that Mr. Ismay says about this particular issue is that we can see there the final paragraph and the last sentence. This is not considered a systematic integrity issue for Horizon, and it should be resolvable from the facts of records in the Horizon transaction logs. Would you have agreed with Mr. Ismay's assessment that this was not a systematic integrity issue?
I think I would have accepted it at face value at the time. And I think the reference to the transaction logs presumably means that all of the discrepancies would have been found and could have been found in due course.
If the transaction logs still existed?
Indeed.
I'm going to move on now from known IT issues to another part of the report in which Mr. Ismay addressed the option of procuring an independent review or audit of Horizon to respond to the challenges to its integrity. Do you recall that aspect of the
Yes.
report? Could we please turn to page 19? Thank you. So in the second half of page 19, we see the heading 4C, independent review and audit angles. The report states, Pol has actively considered the merits of an independent review. This has been purely from the perspective that we believe in Horizon, but that a review could help give others the same confidence that we have. So we see again Mr. Ismay making a very clear statement of confidence in the integrity of the system. Is that fair?
Yes.
He goes on to say, our decision between IT, legal, product and branch accounting, security, and press office has continued to be that no matter what opinions we obtain, people will still ask, what if? And the defence will always ask questions that require answers beyond the report. Further, such a report would only have merit as at the date of creation and would have to be updated at the point at which Horizon or the numerous component platforms were upgraded. What this appears to be saying, does it not, is that it simply wouldn't be worth commissioning an independent review because it would not have the effect of silencing criticisms of Horizon. Is that fair?
Yes.
At the time you read the report, would you have considered that a good reason for not procuring an independent review of Horizon?
I don't think I would, actually. I mean, I clearly wouldn't now. And I don't recall in detail reading this paragraph, but I would like to think that I wouldn't think that this was a suitable reason or series of reasons for not commissioning an independent review.
Sorry, I'd just like to clarify that that's what you're saying. You think you wouldn't have thought?
Yes, clearly I have a clear view now, but trying to place myself back in 2011 and reading this, although I don't have a precise recollection of reading it, I would like to think that I would not accept these reasons as a legitimate reason for not commissioning an independent review.
The report goes on to say, Ernst & Young and Deloitte are both aware of the issue, by which he presumably means the issue about Horizon integrity, from the media, and we have discussed the pros and cons of reports with them. Both would propose significant caveats and would have limits on their ability to stand in court. Therefore, we have not pursued this further. What Mr. Ismay appears to be saying here is that Ernst & Young, Pol's external auditors, and Deloitte's were simply not prepared to sign off on the integrity of Horizon. Is that fair? So far as he understood it.
No, I don't think I would interpret it that way.
How would you have interpreted it?
I interpret this as saying that both the auditors and Deloitte would be likely to introduce so many caveats that a report might not have much value and might not be able to address all of the questions asked.
Isn't that in the nature of a caveat, that what you're saying is I can't sign this off as having integrity because I simply am not in a position to say one way or the other that it does? Is that not what the reference to caveats is?
Broadly, yes. It would depend what those caveats were, of course.
Did you consider at the time that there was a tension between the absolute confidence which Paul was expressing in the integrity of Horizon and the reluctance of its statutory auditors to sign up to that position?
No, because I had a separate relationship with Ernst & Young, and as I'm sure we'll come on to discuss, we were working through a series of improvements to the IT control environment. So set against that knowledge of what I was actually working on, I don't think this paragraph would have particularly surprised me.
As you've just alluded to now, the report goes on to explain that the external audit that Ernst & Young perform includes tests of Post Office Limited's IT and finance control environment, but the scope and materiality of those tests mean that Ernst & Young would not give a specific opinion on the systems from this. We shall come on to that topic shortly, this issue of the Post Office's IT and finance controls. But you were aware from your work with Ernst & Young those tests were carried out, were you not?
Yes.
And that Ernst & Young would not express an opinion on the overall integrity of the system due to the relatively high-level nature of the work that they were doing on those controls and processes. Is that fair?
Yes, it is.
Before we move on from this report, please, there's one final paragraph I'd like to address. Could we turn to page 20? So this is following on from the part of Mr. Ismay's exploration of obtaining an independent review and audit. He states it's also important to be crystal clear about any review of one were commissioned. Any investigation would need to be disclosed in court. Although we would be doing the review to comfort others, any perception that Paul doubts its own systems would mean that all criminal prosecutions would have to be stayed. It would also beg a question for the Court of Appeal over past prosecutions and imprisonments. Did it strike you as odd that one of the reasons being advanced by Mr. Ismay for not commissioning an independent review was that it would need to be disclosed in court?
I don't recall. It certainly strikes me as odd, having reread the report recently. But I don't recall having thought at the time that this was odd. Again, my primary focus would have been to understand issues that might relate to the integrity of Post Office's financial data. And regrettably, I don't think I would have been focusing so much on what might need to be disclosed in court as a result of having an independent review commissioned. I don't think that would have been uppermost in my thoughts at the time.
Do you think you would have been in favour of commissioning such a review when you read this report, bearing in mind the importance of Horizon integrity to your functions and the accuracy of the Post Office's financial statements?
Do I think then that I would have been? I think I accepted the broad thrust of this report at the time. I don't think any of the legal or prosecution issues would have influenced me, but I think I wrongly took assurance on the integrity of the data for my purposes.
You've said several times in relation to this report, I accepted what I was being told. Now, you'd obviously only been in post for a matter of weeks. You couldn't be expected to understand or have an awareness of the detail of this report. But it was your role to challenge, was it not, where challenge was necessary?
Yes, and I would set this report into a broad context of a wide induction programme for taking several months across the whole of the post office network. This is clearly an important part for me to understand what's happening in Chesterfield. Mr. Ismay is telling me that there's a back history here that you need to be aware of, that there have been challenges to the integrity of the system. But I would set that against the context of I'm having parallel conversations with the audit partner from Ernst & Young and getting an independent view from him on the quality of data, the integrity of the system, areas of control weakness that still need to be addressed. So this is an important piece of context, but this was not my only reference point at that stage.
No, by no means, but it was something of a red flag, was it not?
Yes.
Issues with the integrity of the system.
And I'm sure I would have discussed it with the audit partner. Bear in mind that at least 50%, 60% of the audit each year was carried out in Chesterfield.
Thank you. If we can turn then to our next topic, which is the annual independent financial audit conducted by Ernst & Young. What I would like to explore with you now, if I may, is your knowledge of those reviews that Ernst & Young conducted on Pol's IT governance and control environment. You've explained in your statement you weren't in post at the time when Ernst & Young conducted and finalised their audit for the financial year 2010 to 2011.
Correct.
That's correct. But the findings of that audit were communicated to you and you discussed them with the audit partner, Angus Grant, is that right?
Yes, I did.
You state that your conversation with Mr. Grant was positive, so far as you recall.
It was. I recall it was a positive conversation. He described a gradual improvement in the overall quality of internal controls. He referenced the fact that there was more work to be done, and I think, as we'll see in the executive summary for the management letter from 2010-11, he referenced some specific areas that he described as refinements rather than fundamental control deficiencies. So, from my point of view, I wanted to know how bad things were and, frankly, what the chances were of serious management letter points and or a qualified audit. And he assured me that neither of those was the case.
As you've just explained, you took assurance from the fact that the audit had not identified issues that would lead to a qualification of the report. That really is the nuclear option, is it not, to qualify the financial statements of a business?
It is.
And therefore there might be some very serious issues which need to be addressed, but which don't necessarily lead to a qualification.
That's true.
Could we please bring up the management letter which was produced by Mr. Grant in August 2011? It bears the reference POL 000300217. Thank you. On page 2 of this document, please, we have the introductory letter from Mr. Grant to Sarah Hall. Do you recall what Miss Hall's role was?
She was financial controller.
Thank you. It bears the heading Internal Control Matters Arising from the 2011 Audit. And it goes on to state in the second paragraph, our review of the company's systems of internal control is carried out to help us express an opinion on the accounts of the company as a whole. This work is not primarily directed towards the discovery of weaknesses, the detection of fraud or other irregularities, other than those which influence us in forming that opinion, and should not therefore be relied upon to show that no other weaknesses exist or areas require attention. Accordingly, the comments in this letter refer only to those matters which have come to our attention during the course of our normal audit work and do not attempt to indicate all possible improvements that a special review might develop. So this really here is one of those significant caveats that we saw discussed in Mr. Ismay's report, which is to say that an audit of this type should never be relied upon as signing off a system as having integrity, because its primary function is to look at those areas which might have an impact upon the financial statements, but not more holistically at the system. Is that fair?
That's true, but I would say it's difficult to imagine when you look at all the transactions that are covered within the financial statements, it's difficult to understand exactly how extensive weaknesses could be that would not have any impact at all on the financial statements of the organisation. But I accept that he's not giving a blanket green light to the Horizon system, nor would I have expected him to.
I think the point is it not so much that weaknesses in the system wouldn't have an impact on integrity? Is it not rather that Ernst & Young are not looking at all aspects of the system? They're not looking at the code. They're not looking at the specifics of the underlying architecture and structure of the system, and therefore they're not signing it off overall as robust.
That's correct.
Notwithstanding that caveat, Ernst & Young had detected deficiencies in Paul's IT environment, had they not?
They had.
If we could turn to the executive summary piece on page 3. So in the first paragraph, we see a point you've already alluded to, which is that improvements had been made by Post Office Limited. So it means the finance leadership team at Post Office Limited has implemented and processed improvements throughout the organisation during the past financial year. In particular, Focus Management Action has addressed many of the issues raised in our prior year management letter and led to significant improvements in the overall payroll control environment. The recommendations we have made in this report should be seen as refinements rather than fundamental control deficiencies in comparison. So that really summarising the point you made earlier as to what you took from this report. Improvements have been made. These were refinements now being identified, not fundamental control deficiencies. Is that
correct?
Okay. It goes on to state, however, the main area we would encourage management focus on in the current year is improving the IT governance and control environment. Within the IT environment, our audit work has again identified weaknesses, mainly relating to the control environment operated by Pol's third-party IT suppliers, who were,
Fujitsu.
so far as you were aware, Fujitsu. Our key recommendations can be summarised into the following 4 areas. The fourth of which is to strengthen the review of privileged access. What did you understand this letter to mean by privileged access?
I think I understood it to be a theoretical possibility that people could access elements of the system. Having been told that there were no back doors to the system, I would not have believed that this entailed access to the, what I would call the front office, the branch accounts of Horizon. But I could see that it was a significant finding and a control weakness that would need to be addressed in short order.
When you say that you understood it to be only a theoretical possibility, is it your evidence that you, in reaching that assumption, you were relying upon what Mr. Ismay had told you about the absence of backdoors?
I can't certainly Mr. Ismay's report would have been in my mind. I can't recall whether there would have been other references as well. That may not have been the only reference point that I had for forming that opinion.
Bearing in mind this is identified as one of the 4 main areas which require management attention, would you not have discussed this with Mr. Grant at the time to test your assumption that it was a purely theoretical possibility?
I don't recall whether I discussed these 4 issues specifically with him at the time. It's likely that I would have done, but I don't recall the conversation.
So are you saying that you think your conversation simply focused on the positive areas of improvement?
Well, I think that was the wider context, was that things had improved greatly, but there are some areas that you need to continue to improve together with your IT, excuse me, your IT colleagues and your third-party supplier. Hence the first reference to improving governance of the outsource application management. There's clearly a criticism there of the way that Post Office was managing the Fujitsu relationship, the degree to which we were taking direct control of the control environment.
It's likely, is it not, that Mr. Grant would have discussed each of those 4 points with you in some detail? No?
Quite possibly.
You simply don't recall?
I don't recall.
It might assist if we were to look at the section of the report which addresses this issue, please. Could we turn to page 31? Thank you. So we see the left-hand column bears the heading background, the middle column recommendation, and the final column management comment. In the bottom row, the report reads, we reviewed privileged access to IT functions, including access to user administration functionality across all in-scope applications and their supporting infrastructure. It goes on to say, if we can turn over the page, please. Our examination revealed it deals first with PolSAP, which was the Post Office back-end accounting systems, is that correct? And then goes on to deal with Horizon Next Generation on the following page, please. It states there are inappropriate system privileges assigned to the ASOP role and system manager role at the Oracle database level on the branch database server supporting HNGX. There are also inappropriate privileged access at the Oracle database level on the transaction processing system server DAT supporting HNGX. Would you have understood at the time what was being referred to here, do you think?
I don't think I would have had a detailed understanding of it, and clearly it's taken on far greater significance since that time. I think I would have viewed this as one of a series of areas of weakness. I would have viewed it as theoretical, but something which needed to be addressed and which in due course we did take steps to address, both internally and with Fujitsu over the course of the next 12 months. And indeed, in the financial year, my first financial year, 2011-12, significant steps were taken to address each of these, and Ernst & Young carried out compensating testing to be able to give themselves the assurance they needed, admittedly for the purpose of verifying the financial statements and the being able to give us a clear audit. So, yes, looked at in isolation with what we now know, this looks like a very clear message. What we actually did was to gradually close over the course of the next 12 to 18 months all of these loopholes. And in fact, for the financial year, which commenced 1st of April 2012, we had ISAE 3402, which is the international standard for accreditation for testing of IT controls in place at the cost of Fujitsu. So we had effectively closed all of these doors within 8 months of me joining the organisation.
We'll come on shortly, Mr. Gray, to Mr. Day, sorry, to the subsequent audit work and assurance work that you were involved in. But if we could turn, please, to the following page, we can see what Ernst & Young said about the consequences of inappropriate privileges or accesses to the system. So in the left-hand column under background, we see that the last paragraph in the first row reads, unrestricted access to privileged IT functions increases the risk of unauthorized, inappropriate access, which may lead to the processing of unauthorized or erroneous transactions. On the face of it, these statements indicated, did they not, that Fujitsu staff had the ability to access parts of the Horizon system in a manner which was unauthorized or inappropriate. Is that fair?
That's my understanding now. I don't think that was my understanding at the time.
It's right, is it not, that that statement was in direct contradiction to what you've been told by Mr. Isbay about the absence of backdoors into the Horizon system, was it not? If it could lead to the processing of unauthorized or erroneous transactions, it couldn't possibly be right that sub-postmasters had complete ownership of their accounting, could it?
No. Again, I'm sure I would not have interpreted this at the time as being a reference to, even a theoretical reference to Fujitsu employees being able to access individual branch accounts. This is talking about the Horizon estate as a whole and a perceived weakness relating to the inappropriate use of privilege, access, authority. It's a serious matter, but I don't think I'm sure I didn't relate this back to individual sub-postmaster accounts.
What do you think you understood it to mean when it referred to the processing of unauthorized or erroneous transactions?
Well, just that there was a theoretical possibility.
Why was it only theoretical, though? This is saying that they have, as a matter of fact, unrestricted access, that they have inappropriate privileged access. So they did have this access. It wasn't purely theoretical, was it?
Well, it doesn't say how many or how many incidences there had been, whether indeed they'd ever been used, but it's showing that there is a control weakness that could give rise, in theory, to unauthorized transactions broadly within the Horizon Online estate. I can read it completely differently now in the knowledge of hindsight and understand exactly what that could potentially mean in terms of individual branch accounts. But again, it doesn't speak to the suggestion that could be done without a sub-postmaster's visibility of such a transaction.
I might just finish this topic. So I think that might be a suitable time to take a short break, please, if that's
All
convenient.
right. Let me just ask you, Mr. Day, isn't Ms. Hodge right when she asks you to remove the word theoretically from your answer in this sense, that unauthorized access in the way that Ernst & Young are describing could take place? That wasn't theory. However, there was no evidence that it had taken place.
Yes, I would agree with that, sir.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Can we please return at 15:15?
Yes, of course.
Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Day, before the break, we were looking at the Ernst & Young independent annual audit for the financial year 2010 to 2011. Forgive me, the management letter from that audit. I'd like to turn, please, to the recommendations which Ernst & Young made to address the weaknesses identified in the IT control environment. This is at POL 000-30217. If we could start, please, at page 31. Thank you. So we looked firstly at the column bearing the title Background. We can see the recommendations contained in the middle column. And it states, we recommend, forgive me, in the final row, we recommend that management conducts a review of privileged access to IT functions across all in-scope applications. And, thank you, they're supporting infrastructure to determine whether the level of privileged access granted is appropriate. Where the level of privileged access granted is appropriate. It then reads, where access is deemed to be inappropriate, this access should be revoked immediately. It goes on to say, please, at page 34, forgive me. Thank you. So in the top row, management should implement monitoring controls to help ensure that controls operated by the third-party service provider, we know to be Fujitsu, are in place and are in operation. For example, monitoring of appropriateness of access to privileged users and profiles. Now, so far as you were aware, who within the business would have been responsible for taking these recommendations forward?
The IT function, the CIO.
Would that be in conjunction with finance or in isolation?
I would have viewed my responsibility as owning the audit overall. Therefore, I would have had an expectation that IT colleagues working in conjunction with Fujitsu would have addressed any IT control issues arising from the prior year management letter, just as I would have expected my own financial accounting reporting team to have been responsible for any specifically financial issues which had arisen. But here we're talking about IT control issues.
The CIO at the time was Leslie Sewell, is that correct?
Correct.
Do you recall receiving a briefing in May 2012 from Ms. Sewell in which she addressed these recommendations?
I've seen that document recently. I don't recall at the time receiving it.
Please could we bring it up? It's POL 00143-065. Thank you. So we can see at the top it's a briefing for the Chief Executive and for you as Chief Financial Officer in relation to Post Office IT general controls, and this is in respect of the audit for the financial period 2011 to 2012. But as we'll see, it comments on some of the progress which had been made in relation to the observations in the previous year's audit. Under the heading Purpose, it states that the paper is to provide an update on, firstly, progress made in addressing the observations from the 2011-2012 IT General Controls Audit. Secondly, the implementation of an SAS 70 ISAEI 3402 style report. And thirdly, the observations arising from the 2011 to 2012 audit and proposed management response. Just pausing there, you mentioned before the break the implementation of an ISAE 3402 type audit. Can you explain, please, what that was?
Yeah, this was an internationally recognised standard for assurance engagements relating specifically to the testing of IT control environments. So it was considered a best-in-class certification of the quality of IT controls. And from more or less the day I started, there had been strong encouragement, particularly from the Royal Mail Group Audit, Risk and Compliance Committee, that I should seek this accreditation from Fujitsu. And as we'll come on to see, in fact, the CIO achieved that for the start of the 2012-13 financial year.
In terms of what this report achieved, was it materially different to the tests which Ernst & Young had carried out of the IT control environment for the period 2010 to 2011?
My understanding is that, well, firstly, it was internationally accredited. It was an industry standard, but that in the intervening year, 2011-12, Ernst & Young had carried out extensive compensating testing, as they called it. I don't think I knew exactly what that involved, but it was sufficient for them to be able to give the same degree of assurance that they would be able to give in subsequent years as a direct reliance on the ISAE 3402. The point that they made to me strenuously was that there was both an efficiency argument here, which is it didn't make sense for them to be, for us, Post Office, to be paying them to do compensating controls for a third-party system. And secondly, that there was a point of principle, which was that surely Fujitsu, who would have other clients, presumably with similar requirements, should take responsibility, certainly financially, for achieving that accreditation.
And just to be clear, the ISAE 3402 style of report would not have been an independent forensic audit of Horizon that had been that type of audit that had been mooted in Mr. Ismay's report back in 2010.
No, it wouldn't. No, this would have been a more efficient and, as I say, more widely recognised way of achieving the aims of having the financial statements be true and fair and accurate. It would not be a widespread assurance on the integrity of the Horizon IT system.
Its primary purpose then being to streamline
Yes.
those processes.
Yes. Sorry, could I just add one thing?
Please.
As far as I'm aware, though, it did address specifically all of the 4 issues that had been raised in the 10-11 management letter issue. So
Including privilege.
it included testing of privilege access authority.
Under the heading background, please. This briefing reminded you, if we go down please to paragraph 2.3, this briefing would have reminded you that the 2010-2011 audit had resulted in a number of actions for Post Office and Fujitsu to address, which it says were concluded by October 2011. Is that consistent with your recollection?
Yes.
And it states the implementation of these actions had resulted in significant changes to our processes and to deliver improvements to our IT general controls. It goes on to say, given the timing of this year's audit, in January and February of 2012, there was some time for these changes to have embedded. The improvements are evidenced in the findings of the 2011 to 2012 audit, where there are no high-risk observations within the 7 identified versus 10 last year, and only 25 specific recommendations versus over 70 last year. Now, appended to the briefing is a summary of the 7 observations which were made as part of the 2011 to 2012 audit. They're contained at Appendix B on page 5 of this document, please. So we see here, it bears the title Summary of 2011-2012 Ernst & Young Audit Recommendations and Proposed Management Responses. So these are fresh recommendations arising from the latest audit of Post Office's financial statements. Is that correct?
It is.
And the first of these relates to privileged access. So Ernst & Young appears to repeat the recommendation to Post Office to conduct a review of privileged access for in-scope applications, that being Horizon and PolSAP, the Post Office back-end accounting systems. That's the first recommendation. The second being to revisit the need to grant access to SAP All and SAP New levels. Would you have understood at the time, do you think, to what that was referring?
Yes.
Oh, and what was that?
Sorry,
To SAP All and SAP New.
PolSAP, yes, was data extraction from Horizon for use for further analysis of the financial numbers.
Forgive me, but insofar as there was a need to revisit the granting of access at those levels, would you have had a detailed understanding of what that was referring to?
Yes, I would.
And what did you understand SAP All and SAP New to entail?
I'm sorry, I can't recall that now, but I generally would have recall being disappointed that this finding came back the following year, having read the earlier briefing note that described all of the actions having been undertaken by October 2011. So
there was an inconsistency.
There was an inconsistency
on the
there.
face of it.
Yes, and this was a disappointment that Ernst & Young felt the need to say that notwithstanding some management actions had been taken, they felt that this point still stood.
So that related both to the conducting a review of privileged access and the other recommendation we looked at before, which was the final one, implementing monitoring controls for third-party suppliers, that being Fujitsu. So this was an outstanding
it was,
recommendation.
And this, it was unfortunate that this, what I'd call a sort of transition year, 11-12, between the findings of the 10-11 report that I inherited and the initiation of the ISAE standard on the 1st of April 2012, I think we all believed that we had addressed as well as we could with manual intervention and working with Fujitsu all of the issues from the 10-11 management letter, but this one clearly took longer or we didn't address it to the satisfaction of Ernst & Young.
Now, in the column on the right-hand side, Ms. Sewell, the CIO, provides a summary of the proposed Post Office management response. And that first bullet point provides a definition of privileged access. She says there, privileged access describes the level of control where the user having this access can perform all or nearly all tasks within the system. For example, SAP All provides the capability to process and approve financial transactions within a SAP system. The purpose of SAP All is to enable qualified administration users the capability to maintain the system. Now, before the break, you said in your evidence that you understood privileged access to be a purely theoretical possibility. Did this not show that it wasn't simply theoretical? It was something which was in fact used by administration users to maintain the system. I appreciate this is a reference to SAP, which is the back-end system, but insofar as we're looking at privileged access more broadly, this established, did it not, that it was something wasn't simply could be used, but was in fact used?
It does. I don't think it would have surprised me or alarmed me that there was access to the SAP system. I think that is very distinctly different from access to the front-end Horizon IT system.
So to your mind, because the example given was one relating to SAP, you're saying that you had understood that to be materially different, that is to say, the nature of privileged access to SAP, you understood to be materially different to the privileged access that was available in Horizon?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Now, if we could, that deals, thank you, with privileged access. Do you recall receiving a further report from Angus Grant of Ernst & Young in August 2012?
Yes.
Can that be shown, please? That bears the reference POL 001435525. Forgive me, the second page, please. We see the management, it must be the third page, sorry, the management letter addressed to you, Mr. Day. I don't propose to take you through the control themes and observations because we've seen those summarised in Ms. Sewell's briefing to you. Do you accept that they are materially, that what you were told by Mr. Grant was materially the same as Ms. Sewell had summarised to you in her briefing, namely that the recommendations in relation to reviewing privileged access and implementing controls had not yet been carried out?
Yes, correct.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to a new topic, please. This relates to the actions which you took to report risks relating to Horizon to the board of Royal Mail Group. In December 2011, a report was submitted in your name to the Audit and Risk Committee of Royal Mail Group, addressing Horizon Controls and Post Office's relationship with Fujitsu. Is that correct?
Correct.
This was approximately 4 months into your tenure as CFO, and was before Post Office Limited had formally separated from Royal Mail Group. Is that right?
That's right.
Although the report went out in your name, I think it's your evidence that you had very limited input into its preparation. Is that right?
Yes, I would have taken responsibility for the contents, and as I think I referenced in my statement, it was a request of a previous Royal Mail Group Audit, Risk and Compliance Committee that I should come with a paper addressing the concerns which I think related to private eye, amongst other things. So no, I took and I take full responsibility for that paper.
Please could we bring up some correspondence relating to the production of that report, which has been disclosed to the inquiry. That bears the reference POL 00295091. Thank you. If we scroll down, please. Thank you. So the first email in the chain is from Sarah Hall, who, as we know, was a financial controller of Post Office Limited. And she addresses the email firstly to you and then to other senior managers in the post office. The subject is Royal Mail Group Audit and Risk Committee, paper draft, Re-Horizon, urgent for review by Thursday midday. She explains, dear all, the Royal Mail Group Audit and Risk Committee requested a paper on the IT controls and the Horizon claims. With input from various experts, this has now been drafted, but is clearly a sensitive area. So I attach the draft for your review and comments before it goes to group for circulation to the ARC. So I think in fairness, as it says there, the original draft put together by others, but brought to your attention for review and comment before it was submitted.
Correct.
Could we turn, please, to the draft that was appended to this email, which bears the reference POL 000295092. Thank you. So this paper bears the heading Update on Post Office Limited Horizon Controls and Relationship with Fujitsu. And it states its purpose to be to set out the controls that operate around the Post Office Limited Horizon system, the relationship with Fujitsu, and why the Post Office is able to rely on these controls in the light of, firstly, IT control issues identified at last year's audit, and secondly, possible challenges against the integrity of the Horizon platform. Overall, stepping back, the purpose of this paper was to give assurance to the Audit and Risk Committee about the integrity of the Horizon system. Is that fair?
Yes.
Under the heading Background, at paragraph 2, the draft report refers to the findings of Ernst & Young's audit for the financial year 2010 to 2011. So that was the original management letter that you saw shortly after your arrival into post. And it said this: there were a number of IT controls identified during the 2010 to 2011 year-end Ernst & Young audit. These were largely centred on Fujitsu, and a number of recommendations were included in the management letter following the audit. Unlike other RMG IT suppliers, Fujitsu does not have an SAS 70 or equivalent report on its controls, and the consequences of this is that EY needs to do full testing of all systems which are integral to the financial results. No mention was made here or anywhere else in the report of Ernst & Young's findings that Horizon had inappropriate system privileges, which potentially called into question the financial integrity of the system, did it?
That's true.
When you read this draft report, were you not struck, did that not strike you as a significant omission, namely the failure to acknowledge such a finding by Pol's independent auditors?
No. I think this paper attempted to paint the whole picture of the relationship with Fujitsu contractually, the issues, it alluded to the issues that had arisen in the 2010-11 audit. I don't think it would have been necessarily appropriate to go into those in a great deal of detail. And moreover, the issue, the fourth of the four issues identified, which now, of course, we understand to have much greater significance, would not have had that huge a significance at the time. So I don't think this was in any way hiding the detail of what Ernst & Young had found. I think it's an attempt to summarise that there had been issues. They largely related to Fujitsu. They were being worked through, and the backdrop to, as I mentioned before, to this discussion at the Royal Mail Group ARC was a previous lobbying for me and others to get Fujitsu to assure their system. So that's largely the question that the exam question we were trying to answer in this paper. It wasn't to give the Royal Mail Group Audit Committee an absolutely full blow-by-blow explanation of everything that had come up in the 10-11 Ernst & Young audit.
I'm not suggesting that you would have been expected to go into that level of detail, but the context of this report, was it not, that claims were being made about Horizon's lack of financial integrity, and you've been asked by the committee to provide a report addressing those claims. That's correct, isn't it?
Broadly, yes, but it's all of those issues that were itemised in the 2010-11 Ernst & Young management letter, and the solution was seen as the earliest possible adoption of SAS 70 or equivalent.
You accepted earlier that a SAS 70 report was not going to provide complete assurance on the Horizon system, because it was simply going to streamline the process of testing the IT controls. So that in and of itself wasn't an answer to claims about Horizon's integrity, was it?
It wasn't an all-encompassing answer. It was an answer to the question, can we depend on Horizon to provide accurate financial data? Bear in mind the Royal Mail Audit, Risk and Compliance Committee was engaged in making sure that primarily that the financial accounts were accurate.
The one issue in Ernst & Young's management letter which did go directly to the financial integrity of Horizon was privileged access, was it not?
I think I would agree with that in hindsight. I had that understanding at the time.
But that one issue was not mentioned in this report.
No, simply that I don't think it had particular resonance. I don't think we saw, if you like, the first 3 points of those 4 summary points that Ernst & Young had made as distinct from the 4th point, being the privileged access point. That's taken on far greater significance since those days.
Some of this paper draws very heavily on Mr. Ismay's original report of August 2010.
Yes.
Excuse me, 2010. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
What it doesn't contain is any reference to the known IT issues that Mr. Ismay mentioned in that report. Do you accept that?
I do accept that.
And why is that?
Because, as I said earlier, I don't think those were... I think that there were 2 categories of bug or anomaly. The ones generated at the terminal through input errors, potentially, or the more, shall I say, ones which impacted customers more, and that subcategory that Mr. Ismay referred to in his note around screen freezes, incomplete transactions, the postmaster's not sure whether a transaction had gone through or not, the barcode sticking. These were, in my view, and I believe others' view, these were routine problems that would get resolved from time to time, and that would have an impact on customers, and that was a large focus at the time. But I don't think they're things which would naturally have lent themselves to a review with the Royal Mail Group Audit Committee about concerns around Horizon generally.
Was the purpose of this report simply to identify all the positive control measures that were in place, but not to actually give a full warts and all assessment of the true position? Is that really where we ended up with this report, do you think?
No, I think at the time I viewed this as, I accept the point that this is heavily influenced by the earlier ISMAY report, and indeed Mr. ISMAY had a large input into compiling this report. But equally, I placed reliance on the objectivity of my financial controller, who was a very good financial controller, to critically evaluate that information. And I think that this, I certainly thought, and I still think that this presented a fairly fair and balanced view of the situation. It comprises reference to expectations of Fujitsu, acknowledgement that we don't have the right certification in place, acknowledgement that there have been challenges to the integrity of Horizon, and an intention to a clear pathway to show what we're going to do about it.
Please could we return to the email correspondence of the 30th of November 2011, which was at, thank you. We can see there in the top half of the page is Mr. Ismay's response to Ms. Hall's original email enclosing the draft. He writes, and you're copied in, not copied, forgive me, one of the addressees of the email. His first comment in relation to paragraph 1, he requests that a sentence be added along the following lines. The IT control issues identified during the audit did not question the integrity of accounting data in the system. Rather, they were recommendations about the documentation and authorization of changes to systems and about opportunities for streamlined assurance. Pausing there, did that strike you as an accurate statement of the findings which Ernst & Young had made in their 2010 to 2011 audit?
At the time, yes.
And now?
Less so now, given what we now know about Horizon.
Given what we now know about Horizon, or more specifically about privileged access?
Yes.
Mr. Ismay goes on to say, the rationale for this, that is to say for requesting that amendment, is that for purposes of ongoing Royal Mail Group criminal prosecution activity, Rob Wilson, the Royal Mail Group head of criminal law, has advised that that was not the case, that were that not the case, then current prosecutions would have to be stayed. It is important to make clear Ernst & Young did not challenge the integrity of accounting data in the system. Again, we see here a very clear concern being expressed by Mr. Ismay that any challenge to the integrity, financial integrity of Horizon would undermine the safety of Post Office's private prosecutions. Do you agree with that?
I would have, as I said earlier, my primary focus would have been on the first half of this paragraph and the last line, because I would have been considering the impact on the veracity of our financial statements. I mean, rereading, I don't recall reading this at the time, but rereading this recently, I'm shocked at the rationale that's given, and I don't understand. To me, it's a non sequitur anyway. Either the data has integrity for accounting and reporting purposes, or it doesn't. And the last thing that would have been on my mind would have been linking it to previous criminal cases or staying prosecutions. I can't understand why those two things would have been drawn together.
Thank you. I'd like to address another topic which concerns the response to Second Sight's interim report. So with your permission, I propose to deal with this topic and then see where we are. It may be that we can take a slightly earlier break for lunch, but rather than taking another morning break, so unless you...
No, you deal with it in whichever way you think appropriate, Ms. Hogg.
Thank you, sir. You say in your statement that you don't recall having any direct involvement in the instruction of Second Sight or the day-to-day management of their work. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Given your oversight of product and branch accounting, to which you referred earlier, do you think you ought to have been involved in the engagement of Second Sight as forensic accountants who would be looking at cases handled by that division?
Not necessarily. Yes, they would have been looking at historic allegations about the Horizon system. I would have expected to have been kept briefed on progress. I would not have expected to have been involved in their work more closely than that. And indeed, I was kept briefed, I believe, from time to time.
As a member of the board, you received updates in relation to Second Sight's investigations, is that correct?
Yes.
These culminated in a board meeting on the 1st of July of 2013, in which the board received an update from the chief executive shortly before the interim report was finalised and circulated to interested parties. Is that right?
That's correct.
Please could we look at the minutes of that meeting on the 1st of July? They bear the reference POL 00021 515. We can see there from those present, you're the last named under present, in attendance with the chairman, chief executive, non-executive directors, and other directors of the company. If we scroll down, please, the first item on the agenda was Horizon, and it states the CEO apologised for the short notice in keeping the board updated, but explained that issues had arisen over the last couple of days. She gave an update on the Horizon review, which was being undertaken by Second Sight, and their interim report, which was to be presented at a meeting of MPs on the 8th of July. The investigation to date had found no systemic issues with the Horizon computer system, but had highlighted areas for improvement in support areas such as training. You state in your evidence that the board, and by which presumably you meant you as well, had felt reassured by this update, particularly by the suggestion that there were no systemic issues in the system. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Ms. Reynolds, however, went on to explain, under subparagraph B, like any large computer system, Horizon would occasionally have anomalies, and two were known over recent years. The business had dealt with these anomalies to ensure no sub-postmaster was out of pocket, and these anomalies had not affected any of the cases which Second Sight had reviewed. Second Sight had been told of these anomalies, and they would include them in their report. At the time of this update, did you know to what Ms. Reynolds was referring by these two anomalies?
I didn't, no.
It would have been apparent to you, would it not, that they, from the update that you received, they related to accounting errors in the system? Would you have gleaned that from the suggestion that they'd been dealt with by the business to ensure no sub-postmaster was out of pocket?
I don't think I gleaned it from this update, but I gleaned it on reading the Second Sight report a short while later.
When you read the Second Sight report, you discovered, I think you say, the existence of those two bugs, the receipts and payments mismatch bug and the local suspense account bug. Is that correct?
It is, yes.
Bearing in mind that you had oversight of the division that was responsible for identifying any alleged accounting errors arising from those bugs, did it surprise you to learn this for the first time from, I suppose, firstly, Ms. Reynolds' update, but the detail from Second Sight's report?
Yes, it did.
Did it concern you that these anomalies were known to the business, but had not been previously brought to your attention as CFO?
I can't remember if it concerned me. I was surprised, and I remember being assured, and you can see through the second site report, that Post Office had assured them that these bugs had been rectified and there'd been no detriment to any sub-postmasters. But I regret that I didn't take any closer action, follow-up action, to understand why I had not known about these earlier.
So at the time then, would you have been concerned that this discovery called into question the accuracy and reliability of the reporting lines up to you as CFO? Are you saying only with hindsight?
I think with hindsight, certainly. I can't recall having been alarmed, but I'm not sure now, knowing what I know now. I think I should have been alarmed, I should have been concerned, but I don't think I was at the time. I think I took, unfortunately, assurance that these matters were in the past, had been remediated, had been dealt with, and I probably put them into that category of relatively routine things which go wrong with an IT system and get fixed. I don't think I made a connection to how on earth can I rely on my financial data if these two things have happened in the past without my knowledge. I don't think I made that connection.
Did you take any steps after these anomalies, these bugs were brought to your attention to assure yourself that any accounting errors caused by them had in fact been identified and remedied?
I don't recall, but I think it's unlikely that I did.
Why is that?
Well, I have no recollection of making any specific intervention. As I say, I would have, I think on the basis of what I read in the second site report, I would have been surprised to learn about them. Then maybe slightly perturbed that they had been divulged by Post Office, apparently, to second site. So slightly perturbed that I wasn't part of that disclosure process. But in terms of my primary focus of does this give me cause for concern about the accuracy of my financial statements? No, it wouldn't have done. Looking at the number of cases, looking at the order of magnitude, I'm afraid I would have simply been applying a materiality filter to that.
Which is to say that the value of any accounting shortfall would not have been sufficiently high to register with you as a significant risk at a business level?
Well, yes, twofold. Firstly, that I was assured they'd been remediated and that no sub-postmaster was out of pocket, because clearly they could have been material sums for an individual sub-postmaster. But then with my CFO hat on, do these make me concerned that I've misstated my accounts? No.
Thank you. On the following page, the minutes of the meeting record that the CFO was concerned that the report from the independent forensic accountants was not as factual as expected and could lead to loose language at the MP meeting.
CEOs.
Sorry, the CEO, forgive me. And so paragraph D, the board asked the business to challenge Second Sight to ensure changes were made to the report where possible, and asked the business to prepare their communication to combat any inaccuracies. Can you explain, please, this reference in the minutes to the board asking Pole to challenge Second Sight to ensure that changes were made to the report?
I don't recall this specific part of the conversation, but my general recollection is that there was a disappointment with the lack of evidence-based findings. You referenced earlier the periodic updates from the CEO through the course of the Second Sight investigation, which were broadly that there was nothing systemically wrong with the system, but that some of the language used was quite emotive. Some of the examples seemed to be anecdotal and not evidence-based. And that was a general feeling from that meeting. So I think that's the context for the board seeking to challenge Second Sight where appropriate, to be more specific, to try and draw out themes, particularly my interest being in can we find things which are more widespread that there might be something we can do about, and to reduce the degree of perceived anecdotal or lack of evidence-based findings. That's the general sense, but I don't have a specific memory of the conversation.
Between the date of this meeting on the 1st of July and the next meeting of the board on the 16th, Ms Reynolds provided several updates to the board via email. Do you recall that?
I know that a lot happened in those 2 weeks, and I don't recall everything that happened, but through this inquiry process I've been able to piece together quite a lot of what I think happened, such that, as I'm sure we'll come on to discuss, the tone of the 16th of July board meeting was really markedly different from that of the 1st of July.
I'd like to explore with you a little bit why that might be. Now, one of the risks which Ms Reynolds identified in her emails to the board related to the reopening of past prosecutions brought by Post Office as a result of Second Sight's findings. Do you recall that risk being raised?
I don't. I've seen a document which from Ms Reynolds which was updating the board on the progress of meetings with, I believe, James, now Lord Arbuthnot, and other MPs. And I think it was in that document, which is broadly positive in terms of the findings and the discussion with MPs, but references, I think, Lord Arbuthnot's concern or determination that we should go back and look at previous prosecutions as a bit of a frustration for Ms Reynolds. So but I've seen that recently. I don't recall having read that note at the time.
Could we please turn up your statement at WITN 10000100, please, at page 24. At page 24, please, paragraph 69. Thank you. You're referring here, perhaps if we go back a page just to place that in context, sorry. Thank you. You were asked questions in your Rule 9 request about financial and reputational risk. And you refer here to an email from Ms Reynolds dated the 6th of July, in which, in advance of the publication of the interim report, she identified one of the main reputational and potentially financial risks arising from the review relates to possible attempts to reopen, thank you, past prosecutions based on the findings. Now, you say, I do not remember this being discussed by the board, but I do not believe this was a significant financial concern. My recollection is that we believed only a small number of historic cases would be affected, leading to a limited number of possible compensation claims, which from a poll financial reporting perspective would be immaterial in quantum. Now, it might be suggested that here you're trying to downplay somewhat the significance of the risks relating to the reopening of past criminal cases. Would that be fair?
No.
You do, however, dismiss the financial risk as being one that's really immaterial to you as CFO in terms of its quantum.
That was my perception at the time. And the context would be the second site report. So I had not made the direct connection, nor had I been party to the conversation with MPs and the determination to include past prosecutions in the findings. Perhaps my perhaps naive view at the time was that there would be a small number of people who might need to be compensated, but that was, in my mind, in relation to the findings of the second site report, primarily around poor support and training to sub-postmasters.
This wasn't the first time that someone within Post Office had raised a concern about the reopening of criminal prosecutions with you, was it?
Remind me?
In Mr. Ismay's original report to you, he specifically addresses the risk of reopening cases if Horizon's found not to have integrity. We saw that raised again in the email of November 2011. So was this not something of which you were aware, a perception of a greater risk to the business, possibly an existential threat?
No, it wasn't. And indeed, there's a 2-year hiatus between those two references. A 3-year hiatus in one case and 2 years in the second case of those connections you just attempted to make. So no, that absolutely would not have been in my thought, and therefore I would not have written in my statement that I thought we were only dealing with a small number of compensation cases at this stage.
The second site's interim report was addressed again at the board meeting on the 16th, as you've referenced already. I think you recall, is it fair to say you do recall that meeting, the tone of it now?
Yes.
Please could we bring up the minutes of that meeting? There's a poll 000211516. Thank you. It's at page 6, please, where we see second site's interim report was discussed. Thank you. So in the first paragraph, by way of update, the CEO explained that although second site's report had been challenging, it had highlighted some positive things as well as improvement opportunities. The business had been praised in Parliament for setting up the independent review. The proportionality of the tiny numbers of cases had been emphasised. It's a point that you've, in fairness, raised a few times. And no systemic issues have been found with the Horizon computer system. However, there were cultural issues which had to be addressed to improve the support we gave to sub-postmasters. The CEO stressed this was now a catalyst to make changes in the business. The section I want to ask you about is subparagraph B, please, where it reads, the board were concerned that the review opened the business up to claims for wrongful prosecution. Now, in your statement, you say about this minute, we don't need to bring it up unless you wish to see it, but it reads, I do not recall who made that comment that led to the minute that I've just cited. I don't recall what the specific basis for this concern was. Again, it might be suggested in your evidence that you're seeking to distance yourself from the seriousness and significance of the concerns that are being voiced at this stage as to the implications that second site's findings had for Post Office's past criminal convictions. Is that fair?
No. Could I add a little more?
Please.
My, having not been involved in the second site work really at all, my views were informed by the periodic updates provided generally by the CEO, occasionally by the General Counsel. So I think the summary in the minutes under B is exactly what my understanding would have been at the time. I've been able to, through this inquiry process and on receipt fairly recently of other documents, to understand a little bit more of the background to why you can see reported under C the board felt that the business had not managed the assignment well. And then if we come on to talk about the request of me to look into the insurance situation, why I can now understand, but didn't at the time, the board had that specific concern about potentially being opening ourselves up to claims of wrongful prosecution. So sorry, that's a very long answer, but in terms of the core document, the second site review itself, and my reading of this minute, which is the only thing I had until recently, I did not have a perception that either of those had in themselves opened us up to claims of possible wrongful prosecution.
I'd just like to test with you a little bit, Mr. Day, what you did know from what we've discussed so far today. You knew upon reading Second Sight's report that it had identified 2 faults in Horizon Online, which we've mentioned, the 2 bugs. That much you accept, yes?
Yes.
You also knew from Ms. Fennell's update that those faults had caused accounting errors, which had to be rectified. That's correct, isn't it?
Well, I knew that from reading the Second Sight report, yes.
Either the report or the
Yes.
update. You would have appreciated at the time, would you not, that the existence of such faults potentially called into question the integrity of Horizon's financial accounting. You were alive to that risk, surely.
Potentially.
You would also have appreciated, would you not, that Pol's knowledge of these faults called into question the confidence which it stated in Horizon's integrity.
Yes.
And you were aware from the regular updates that that the board received from Ms. Crichton, General Counsel, that Pol was still bringing prosecutions and recovering assets from sub-postmasters and employees in reliance on Horizon data. You knew that, did you not?
Yes, I would have known that, yes.
Did those matters taken together not provide sufficient reason to be concerned that Pol might face claims of wrongful prosecution?
They might have been, but they weren't in my mind at the time. So if I look at the Second Sight report and the periodic updates that I was receiving, it was that there were no systemic issues with the system. There were the 4 spot reviews identified, which particularly SR05 would have been of concern, but these were, as I understood it, work in progress. More work needed to be done by both Second Sight and Post Office to establish exactly the veracity of these particular claims or issues. So no, I don't think. I mean, I genuinely was surprised by the comment in the minutes that, on the basis of what I understood and had been party to, we had opened ourselves up to claims of wrongful prosecution. And that's why I say I don't know. I'm not saying it didn't happen. Clearly it was expressed by somebody on the board, but I don't know who that was or in what context.
As you've acknowledged, the board was sufficiently concerned, was it not, about this issue that it asked you to investigate the insurance position and to ensure that Royal Mail Group and Post Office Limited notified their insurers of the review's findings.
Yes.
We can see the action for that on page 7, please. Thank you. It reads, the CFO was asked what the insurance position was. He promised the board a note on this. He was also asked to ensure that both RMG and the business insurers were given notice of the review's findings. Now, do you recall what action you took to comply with that instruction?
I don't recall the note, whether I wrote a note or not. I did take action to ensure that both Royal Mail Group and Post Office's insurers or their brokers were given notice of the findings. And the reason that Royal Mail Group were involved is that one of the policies, the directors and officers policy, was actually still part of Royal Mail. It was in a 6-year run-off period since 2012. So we shared responsibility for that. So I would have had to have reported it to Royal Mail Group. I don't think I did it personally. I think I did it through a direct report of mine who looked after insurance.
I wonder, please, if we could turn to POL 00108035. Thank you. This appears to be your first update on this matter. So if we could scroll to the, please, to the bottom of the document where the email chain starts. Thank you. Sorry, so that's the bottom of the email. If we could please just get to the top of that first message. Thank you. So this is dated 19th of July 2013, addressed to Orwin Lyons Company Secretary. It reads, Dear all, on Tuesday the board asked for information on 3 things this week. A paper on transitional support services with Fujitsu, which we agreed would be considered by corresponded. The impact of the financial services junction insurance changes, and the continued transitional support from Fujitsu on the strategic plan and bottom line, including the P&L, profit and loss, presumably, and cash flow changes. Thirdly, the impact on Horizon's second site on our insurance cover. The first 2 points are covered by the attached, the final one explained by Chris below. Reads insurance. We discussed what impact the current Horizon issues might have on our insurance, on which we are advised by our insurance broker Miller. Their view is that whilst other insurance policies may be impacted, the most likely one is D&O. You've just explained that was a reference to the
Directors and officers.
Thank you. This had the added complication, as it is the only policy we share with Royal Mail, and was placed by their broker, JLT. Do you recall who that's a reference?
Yeah, I don't recall what it stands for.
The excess of this policy varies under different criteria, but the main one is $25,000 on each and every claim. A meeting's been set up with JLT and Miller to ensure they are fully briefed on the issues before JLT engage with the insurer. Thank you. That's your first update. We see the issue of insurance arises again, however, and you produce a paper to the board in March 2014. This is POL 00027430. This is entitled Insurance Issues Arising from the Complaints and Mediation Scheme. The purpose of this paper is to set out the insurance-related issues for the Complaints and Mediation Scheme, and is an update on the paper submitted to the board reading room in December 2013. In terms of the nature of the risks identified, you describe these at paragraph 3, please. So far, circa 150 applications have been received, of which only about a third have been worked through, so the assessment below is based on our estimation of the issues. It is possible but unlikely that the pattern of cases might develop in a way that changes this assessment. So pausing there, this is of course a reference to the establishment of the Complaint Review and Mediation Scheme. That's correct?
Yes.
And the number of applications received by that scheme for compensation
Yes.
arising in connection with faults in Horizon?
Arising from the findings of the second site report.
Now, earlier on, you, in your evidence, emphasised the very small number of cases which affected your assessment of materiality. By this stage, the Post Office had received 150 applications. Had that changed your assessment of
Yes.
the seriousness and significance of this issue?
Yes, I still felt, we still felt that we were dealing with compensation, but clearly through the course of the second half of 2013 and into 2014, the number of applications and the size of some of the compensation requests, however one might attempt to scale them, were orders of magnitude bigger than we had originally envisaged or imagined as a direct result of the second site review back in July 2013. So yes, this absolutely was now material. It was not just material to me financially, it was taking up a huge amount of management time across the organisation.
Now, so far as your assessment was concerned, the payment of the making of payments under the scheme would not attract insurance cover. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think my developing understanding of the insurance position was, and I'm talking here about professional indemnity rather than D&O insurance, that compensation, if defined as goodwill in relation, for example, to Post Office having poorly supported or trained postmasters, failed to provide them with the requisite tools to do the job properly, could lead to compensation claims which would not be covered by PI insurance, i.e. PI insurance, as I understood it, would be limited, cover would be limited to issues for which Post Office was legally liable.
That is to say, for which they had a legal obligation to pay
Yes.
compensation. Now, one of the aspects of the concerns of the board was not simply the business's liability, but it was the individual liability of directors. Is that correct?
It is.
And did you personally have a concern yourself?
I don't recall having a concern, and going back through all of the documentation, it's clear that there were lots of different conversations around insurance, both at the board and outside of the board, and different non-execs expressing concern about the lack of clarity that I had provided on insurance. And it's difficult to work out from where each person was coming, whether it was on behalf of the organisation in terms of professional indemnity cover, or whether it was on behalf of themselves in terms of possible breaches of directors' duties or errors through the D&O mechanism. It wasn't entirely clear where all of these different challenges and questions were coming from.
What was your perception at the time as to where the focus lay as between the board's interest in their own exposure and the exposure of the business?
My recollection is that the very first conversations were around D&O, and I think that's, but I have to caveat that with I didn't have a full and detailed understanding of exactly which policies might apply in which circumstances. But if I go back to the very beginning of the conversation, which is that board meeting of the 16th of July, my very clear understanding was we were talking about potential compensation, and therefore I don't think it would have been in my mind that D&O was the appropriate cover. But I can't speak for others.
Thank you, sir. That brings me to the end of that topic. I wonder whether if you would be content if we take an early lunch break and return at 1:30 to finish my questions for Mr. Day and then to hand over to recognised legal representatives.
Yes, by all means. So, as you have suggested, we will adjourn now and resume at 1:30.
Thank you, sir.